Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. And another heavyweight news and note smash up video today, and this one's going to be a little bit longer than normal because it's going to encapsulate some of the comings and goings of the past 4 or 5 days. Haven't been able to make a video for a few days, so we're going to crack into it. One of the big topics in recent days is a potential opponent if there is an interim fight for Anthony Joshua, with Alexander Usyk, the current champion who Joshua is due to rematch, currently tied up in Ukraine as he is in the country while the country is at war with Russia. So Joshua, if he faces someone else, who could it be? Well, his promoter Eddie Hearn, and we'll start off with this tweet, has said the likes of Deontay Wilder, Luis Ortiz, Otto Wallin and Joyce, and quote, as he does not want an easy interim fight. And Joshua himself, he was actually quite vocal on social media this week, which in the context of things is very un-Joshua-like, because generally it's pretty canned type sort of stuff that goes on his sites, stuff to do with adverts that he's sort of involved with. He partners with all sorts of different products, all that sort of stuff, or there'll be training clips, but it's generally pretty slick stuff. But clearly he's been onto his accounts and firing up. So we're not covering all of the different tweets, but there were a number of sort of interactions that he had, not just on a social media, but with fans as well, which is also a little bit unusual, besides sort of the live videos that he does do where he does sort of address questions. But in terms of who he is saying, because Otto Wallin was mentioned, and there's a Sky Sports story, and we'll just cut to that now. So the promoter for Otto Wallin has said, Otto is a southpaw like Usyk, numbers don't lie, and according to the stats, he landed more punches than anyone against Fury, including Wilder, Klitschko put together. I believe Otto has the skills, confidence, and with the last fight, the experience of fighting on UK soil to beat Joshua. Well, fighting Kamil Sokolowski isn't necessarily the sort of, build-up you'd want to fight Anthony Joshua, but look, they want that fight. Dmitry Salita is basically trying to talk Otto Wallin into that fight. And of all the names that have been mentioned, to me, that is the least interesting, but we'll come back to that because Otto Wallin has different thoughts. But Dmitry Salita really trying to sell it, but of those comments, so Joshua responded on social media saying, lol, okay, I've shared the ring with most people you see in the heavyweight division today. I boxed Otto Wallin twice as youngsters, and I boxed Joe and stopped him in 1 round. I'd do the same thing today. Ain't nothing changed. Moving on to another one. So someone had said, I'd like to see Joyce boxing get that shot at Anthony Joshua, but I cannot see AJ taking it as Joyce has the tools and heart to win it. Joshua responds and, inverted commas, rolls eyes. You really think I wouldn't fight Joyce boxing? And that does actually get Joyce sort of revved up a little bit on social media. We'll come to that. Joshua in another one. Responding to someone, in my opinion, you ain't been the same since the Ruiz loss. Just looks like you're more cautious now and don't want to attack fighters like you used to. And that's a very sort of apt comment, because I think a lot of us have noticed that Joshua seems a little bit sort of gun-shy, doesn't want to pull the trigger when maybe he would have in the past. But he explains it to be, I wanted to be a slicker boxer. Boxing 101, hit and don't get hit. I was told if I love fighting and want to go on for years, try not to get hit a lot. A loss or a beaten shouldn't make you scared of boxing. It made me work on my weaknesses. Hard to explain, but make of it what you can. Another one, saying, okay, mofos, I usually get paid for talking this much, or Coogan chases me around boxing venues until he pins me down. I'm out. Toodles. And I guess that's, like I said at the start, talking a lot more than he usually has. But of that sort of situation, his promoter has talked about those potential interim opponents, and this was to Behind the Gloves. It's in this graphic here from ESPN Ringside. My kind of feeling of an interim fight is very different to Joshua's feeling. An interim fight, when you're waiting for Usyk, should really be a straightforward procedure. But when AJ's talking about Wilder, which is the name he wants me to look into, Wallin, Ortiz, Joyce, all these kinds of names, like even Joseph Parker. And actually, Joshua had said Joseph Parker can get it. Hearn continues, these are serious fights. So you've got to be careful because the aim is to regain the world heavyweight title. So a lot of names there. I mean, I'm just instantly ruling out Wilder and Ortiz because they're PBC, Joshua, and that cross-promotional thing, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And I think Wilder, off a couple of losses, is not going to step straight into a Joshua fight and risk, that's obviously a huge fight for both of them. A lot on the line. The business side will absolutely come into it. And the fact Otto Wallin's name has been mentioned, I think he's probably the most likely, just because you think of someone like a Joyce who'd want the fight. But I think Joyce is a tougher fight for Joshua than Otto Wallin. Joyce has got that thudding power, he's got a good engine, he will keep coming forward. That would be a tough test for Joshua, although I think a lot of people would have Joshua with his power punching as a favourite. But, we have seen a bit of an indifferent Joshua since the Andy Ruiz loss. But I do think the mention of Wallin, who I think is the least rated out of all those names and probably the least dangerous, and especially in terms of punching power. I mean, sure, he can be tricky, but we've seen against the likes of Kamil Sokolowski, who is a game and tough, durable sort of gatekeeper level journeyman. But Otto Wallin was completely off the boil for large stretches. He looked like he was gassing in the Dominic Brazil fight, although, piecing up Brazil for the most part. I think it is a case that that could be a fight if it was to happen. Anthony Joshua, it's like a poor man's version of Alexander Usyk. He's a couple of pegs below Usyk. Joshua would have a much better chance and would probably blast out Otto Wallin. I think he'd have to break him down over some rounds, Otto Wallin moving and being tricky. But I think that is a case that Wallin would get stopped, I think, eventually by Anthony Joshua. Joyce, though, he was wanting that fight, multiple posts. So you can see here, he says 2 GB Lions in an all-British heavyweight showdown. This fight would be massive. I'm highly ranked and undefeated. Let's get it. And Joshua obviously talking before about having stopped Joyce previously. They've sparred a lot of rounds together. These guys have done a lot of rounds. They're well known to each other. And Joyce is much further along these days than obviously 5 or 6 years ago when he was still an amateur and giving Joshua a lot of work. A la 2014 to 2015, 16, around there. But actually in here, Joseph Parker is saying to Joyce, what happened to our fight? Well, I guess, to me, if Joyce has got an option of an Anthony Joshua fight and Joseph Parker fight, it's obvious why he would want that. And I'm sure Joseph Parker is the same. They all see the payday. But if you really, to be honest about what happened to our fight, well, the fact it hasn't got made probably is more indicative of the Parker side trying to A-side Joyce into oblivion. We're the A-side. Give us the money. Give us the New Zealand pay-per-view. That would be my guess. Negotiating with Team Parker is not easy, as a lot of guys have found. So Joyce, in another post by his management, SJM Boxing, saying, let's have it, AJ. You have Joyce as well, and actually I'll play this clip. He says, if Anthony Joshua wants it, I'll give it to him. Let's get this fight made. Here's the clip.
Definitely a fight that I've always been interested in. It's a big fight and a big domestic dust-up, and I'm here and I'm ready. If he wants it, I'll give it him. Sign the contract.
Otto Wallin, he is saying, I am by far the best option here. Wilder is coming off back-to-back KO losses against Fury that I took the distance and sent to the hospital to get 47 stitches. Ortiz got dropped by Charles Martin that Joshua wiped out in 2 rounds. I think Joyce could give AJ a good fight, but he's nothing like Usyk. The only reason Joshua wouldn't pick me as the opponent is because they know I'm a big threat, and I'll hand him his 3rd loss. #Vikings return. So I think Otto Wallin has obviously been trying to, in recent years, make the most out of that Tyson Fury fight that he had, where he did perform better than many expected. He caught Fury with some shots, opened up a couple of cuts on one of those eyes that made Fury fight different. It was more rugged. He did land more punches because of the sort of fight that Fury had to fight because of those cuts. But he was also soundly beaten on the cards. It's not like that was controversial in terms of the scorecards. I mean, you can make a case that maybe it could have ended in cuts, but obviously that's not how it went. In terms of all the names that are mentioned, for me at least, it is the least appetizing and appealing fight on that ledger. You know, Otto Wallin thinks he's got the best case and is the best guy. Well, of course he would say that, because he wants the fight. He wants the multi-million-dollar payday, as all these other guys want as well. Everyone will drop what they want, what they've got on their plate, if they can get a Joshua fight. They will, snap Joshua's hand off to get that B-side money, which will be in the millions, more than they've all ever seen for the most part. Not Wilder, of course, but some of these other guys like Joyce and Otto Wallin have never made that big bank like others have that Joshua can provide. But yeah, I'm not too interested in that fight, but I could see why that could make some sense. And generally, it's the least appealing and appetizing name on those sorts of, those call-outs that ends up being the guy that's chosen. You can sort of think when Conor Benn was recently calling out all number of names, and then there was names like Chris Van Heerden and other opponents recent for Conor, you're like, well, that's probably going to be the guy. So maybe it is Otto Wallin as an interim fight, as a step before an Usyk fight eventually occurs. But the other option is perhaps it just ends up being that Joshua doesn't have a fight. Maybe this is the best thing for him now. If he's transitioning with a new trainer, all that sort of stuff set up, wants to just sort of tweak his style, the longer the better to bed all that stuff in. Moving on. So you've got Eddie Hearn on Tyson Fury questioning his power. Tyson Fury, in my opinion, doesn't carry the power to take Dillian Whyte out. I believe actually when they trade up left hooks, Tyson Fury will go to sleep, and he will go to sleep in round 11. So that would sort of tend to suggest that Eddie Hearn is expecting a pretty tough and rugged fight. Then it's going to go close to the distance with Whyte sort of pulling one out later on. And Whyte does carry power, but for him to suggest that Tyson Fury doesn't have power, well, that's nonsense. And of course, he's going to be backing his man, and he is actually, by default, helping promote this fight. Of Dillian Whyte. So Tyson Fury says, I've sparred Dillian Whyte many, many times, and every single time I've used him as a punching bag. There were times when he couldn't defend himself. There were times when we had to stop the sparring. And obviously the counter to that is Whyte has said that he's dropped Fury before in sparring with body shots. So make of that what you will. Obviously, these sorts of comments, they're going to help sort of, people will be out there on social media battling and arguing for whatever guy they support, saying, well, who's telling the truth? This guy can drop this guy. I mean, I actually think this is a much better fight than some people are giving it credit for. I think it could be tougher than some people think. I do think Fury is the favourite, but it could be quite rough, tough, rugged, as Adam Smith would say, and be a better fight than some people expect. I'm not expecting some sort of walkover, first or second round knockout for either guy. Triller has announced that Kubrat Pulev will be returning on the Sergey Kovalev vs. Turval Pulev, that's the brother of Kubrat Pulev, on May the 14th. So Kubrat Pulev is set to face Andrey Fedesov. So this has now been officially announced. So a day or two before that, Kubrat Pulev had announced with a sort of homemade promo poster that he'd be facing Fedesov. And actually, that's not a bad fight. When you consider that Kubrat Pulev, after that loss to Anthony Joshua, had some time out of the ring. He was then in that triad combat on Triller. And that's kind of was boxing, but not really. This is really his boxing return. So Andrey Fedesov, he's a decent sort of level gatekeeper, top 30-ish, somewhere there or thereabout. He can make you work, give you rounds, but Kubrat Pulev, even at past 40 now, should be able to get the win. And I guess it's a bit of a heat check, because if he doesn't look good or if he struggles, I mean, maybe that'll influence what he does in his career. But obviously, still wanting to box, and this will give us a bit of an indication of where he's really at, because he may get through this and go, actually, I want to make another run at a title. We're seeing a lot of guys hanging around after 40 these days. Marius Vuk, Carlos Takam, there's heaps of guys. And obviously some of these guys are still boxing at a relatively good level. So we'll see what happens there. But that fight is going to be, as I say, May the 14th. It is going to be in Los Angeles at the Forum. Moving on to a fight announcement. So we have Filip Hrgovic, Zhang Zhilei. So the long-awaited announcement of when they're going to fight. So this is the IBF final eliminator. It was confirmed this week. It'll be the co-main event for Canelo Alvarez versus Dmitry Bivol. That will be on the 7th of May. So good showcase opportunity for Zhang Zhilei and Filip Hrgovic, because obviously it's a big time card. A lot of eyeballs will be on here. It's the co-main event. You know, whoever wins here could get a significant boost to their profile. Let's face it, both these guys need it. I make Hrgovic a strong favourite in this one, but Zhang with his power, he can't be discounted entirely. And Hrgovic hasn't really shown too much proclivity for using his defensive prowess in recent fights. So, if he gets a little bit lazy and just thinks he can bang Zhang Zhilei out of there and eat something, who knows, he could find himself on the canvas. But I like this fight, IBF final eliminator. Both these guys need the opportunity. They've kind of been sort of in a bit of a no man's land. I like the fight. Moving on to Fraser Clarke. So a big step up for him in his second fight, and it kind of had to be basically the guy he fought for his first pro fight a number of weeks ago. On debut, had been stopped previously in a white collar sort of environment or whatever it was, or was it kickboxing? Whatever it was last couple of days, the guy had been pulled out of the crowd effectively in fight week to fight Frazer Clarke. What was his name? Jake something. So Clarke, he'll be facing, as Boxer has announced, Gabriel Enguema. So he's a Spanish journeyman, and actually a lot of people would have seen Enguema recently give Johnny Fisher a few issues. And in that fight, Enguema really wasn't doing a whole lot, but he was making Fisher think he was. Throwing some feints, he wasn't really letting his hands go. He was trying to take the center of the ring, trying to walk Fisher down without really doing too much, without really throwing too many punches. Fisher was just a little bit sort of mystified by what Enguema was doing, but I think Frazer Clarke's amateur sort of pedigree will hold him in good stead for this fight. But there was a question after that first fight a few weeks ago for Clarke. He was really huffing and puffing after just almost a round of action. So a question mark going forward is, if this goes any rounds, what's going to happen with Frazer Clarke, his stamina? Is he going to be more than a 3-round amateur fighter? We're certainly going to see, and possibly quite quickly with this Enguema fight. Anyway, moving on. So Andy Ruiz Jr. back in the gym, seemingly not in the Canelo gym, not with Team Canelo anymore. And he started up something called Andy Ruiz Jr. Promotions. But you can see here, he says Andy Ruiz Jr. training hard, getting ready for a fight date. Hashtag ARG Promotions. So who that fight's going to be against, unclear. Hopefully Luis Ortiz. That is something I think we will want to see. We want to see Ruiz Jr. in a meaningful fight. I mean, the Chris Arreola one, it was what we got, and it ended up being more entertaining than expected. But if Ruiz is going to contend at world level, he really needs to put in a big effort and fight someone of note. And you can see here, this is the Andy Ruiz Jr. Promotions Instagram page. I guess it's kind of by default promotion by me, by accident, but I just wanted to, it must have been recently set up. Says he's promoting Elwin Soto, a few other guys here as well. A few different clips that have been put up in recent weeks. So moving on, the Olympic gold medalist Bakhodir Jalolov, the big Uzbek, he is set to return to the ring in a week's time, officially signing on with Probellum. So a press release has been issued. I actually thought he'd joined Probellum a few weeks ago. There was certainly a press release where he was on a card, and he's soon to be fighting Kamil Sokolowski, and this is a week from the time that the video is recorded. So maybe that was just fighting on the card and now officially joined by the looks of it. So it says unbeaten Olympic gold medalist Bakhodir Jalolov has signed a co-promotional deal with Probellum and DiBella Entertainment. So Lou DiBella was full-time promoting him, but obviously splitting the duties now. So Jalolov says, everyone in the heavyweight division knows all about me, and deep down they know it's only a matter of time before I take over. With Probellum and DiBella Entertainment promoting me, I will become world heavyweight champion as soon as possible. But first, I must take care of business against Sokolowski on March 18 in Dubai. After that, news will start to spread about Bakhodir Jalolov, and the world will soon realize that I'm a world heavyweight champion in waiting. So I'm not quite sure beating Sokolowski sort of gets you that sort of buzz, but I like where his head's at, that he's going to be fighting and making a statement to the heavyweight division of sorts. So Richard Schaefer, president of Probellum, says Bakhodir Jalolov is a giant of a man, and this is a giant signing for Probellum. Jalolov combines the top-level amateur pedigree, phenomenal movement for a man his size, and knockout power. He is destined to become a world heavyweight champion, and working with DeBella Entertainment, Probellum has been delivering those opportunities for him. There is no upcoming heavyweight in the world who possesses the physical advantages and skill set of the big Uzbek. Power, speed, and amazing agility for a giant are the attributes that will allow Bakhodir Jalolov to rise quickly, and that is Lou DiBella saying those statements. His manager, Vadim Kornilov, says, we're looking forward to a prosperous partnership with Probellum on Bakhodir's career. We'll leave that there. And moving on, so Thomas Carty returning to the ring. He is on the Wood Conlon card, so apologies if you're listening a few days after this goes up, but the press conference undercard, so he says, I'm looking forward to Saturday. I have a lot of people coming over to watch me. People from Dublin haven't been given many chances to go on big cards, to get the crowd over for big cards as of late. I'm absolutely delighted there will be a big crowd coming over on Saturday and hopefully progress onto the Irish title before the end of the year. I'll be the first person then to win since Tyson Fury, so looking forward to that. Apologies for the noise in the background if you can hear it. And there was another quote here, but I'm not going to go through that. It was basically waxing lyrical and thanking Dillian Whyte, kind of the thanks Al Heyman type vibes. And rounding up this heavyweight news and notes mashup video, so Kenzie Morrison, he is going to be facing Hasim Rahman Jr., and that is going to be on April 29th in Las Vegas. Or is it April the 9th? I can't quite see by that date. It's tiny. Anyway, in April. So both these guys, I really don't know how good they are. I mean, Kenzie Morrison and his brother, who was also a professional heavyweight, who was recently beaten. Both these guys, basically a lot of fairground club-type shows. Hasim Rahman Jr. not really facing, opposition at a very high level. So it's kind of an interesting matchup. Anyway, I'll leave it there. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.